There was once a farmer who lived in a small, quiet village surrounded by fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. He was not rich, and he did not have fancy clothes or expensive gadgets. In fact, most people in the village would call him an ordinary man, someone who worked hard day in and day out just to make ends meet. Every morning, before the sun even rose, he would get up and tend to his farm. He fed the animals, watered the crops, and repaired fences that had been damaged during the night. It was hard, exhausting work, but he never complained. Despite the long hours and the sweat that ran down his face, he loved his life. To him, there was a certain peace in the simplicity of his daily routine, a rhythm that connected him to the land, to nature, and to something bigger than himself. What made this farmer different from others, however, was not his daily routine or the way he worked on his farm. It was the way he dreamed. While the other villagers were content with small things, like a new plow or a slightly bigger barn, he had dreams that were, at least on the surface, impossible. He would often look up at the sky and imagine flying, not in an ordinary plane, but in a private jet, soaring above the clouds, visiting places he had only ever heard about in books or seen on television. People in the village would shake their heads whenever he spoke about it. "That's for rich people, not farmers like us," they would say. They laughed, thinking his dreams were foolish, unrealistic, or even silly. But the farmer didn't mind. He knew something that most people didn't: dreams were not limited by money, by social status, or by what others thought. Dreams were limited only by one's imagination and determination. Despite being humble and simple, the farmer was incredibly smart. He had a mind that worked quietly and methodically, always thinking ahead. He would save money, not just from selling crops, but from small ventures he started on the side. Sometimes he would help neighbors with extra farm work for a small fee. Other times, he would buy and sell goods, taking tiny risks that slowly started adding up. While no one noticed, he was building something important, a foundation that would one day allow him to achieve the impossible. But he kept this to himself. To the villagers, he was just the same hard-working man who plowed his fields, fed his animals, and went to bed tired every night. Only he knew the bigger picture of what he was working toward. What made the farmer truly inspiring was his attitude toward life. He never complained about the difficulties he faced. When it rained too much and ruined part of his harvest, he didn't cry or blame the weather. He simply worked harder the next day to fix the damage. When machines broke down, he repaired them with whatever tools he had. He believed that nothing in life was wasted, and every problem had a solution if one thought carefully and stayed patient. His resilience made him respected, though few fully understood the depth of his character. He also had a curiosity that went beyond farming. He loved reading about new technologies, business ideas, and inventions. Sometimes, when the day was done and the work in the fields was over, he would sit by the small window of his home, reading books or watching videos on a small device he had managed to save for. He dreamed of more than just surviving. He dreamed of living a life full of experiences and possibilities, a life where he could reach beyond the limits most people accepted. He imagined flying above the clouds, meeting people from different countries, and seeing the world in ways most people could only dream of. Even though he was humble, the farmer carried himself with quiet confidence. There was no arrogance in him, just a steady, calm belief that his dreams were possible, even if they seemed absurd to others. He treated everyone around him with kindness, always willing to help a neighbor or share his knowledge. Yet inside, he carried a secret determination, a plan that he did not share with anyone. This combination of humility and ambition was what made him special. People saw him as ordinary, but he knew he was preparing for something extraordinary. And so, the farmer's days continued, simple, quiet, and full of hard work, but beneath the surface, a fire was growing. His dreams were larger than the fields he plowed and the animals he cared for. They reached beyond the village, beyond the mountains, and beyond what anyone thought was possible for a simple farmer. He was ready, in his own patient, methodical way, to change not just his life, but to prove to everyone that determination, intelligence, and vision could turn even the wildest dreams into reality. This humble farmer, ordinary to the outside world but extraordinary in his thinking, was about to step into a story that no one in the village, or even in the world of the rich and powerful, would ever forget. After years of quietly building his savings and carefully planning his future, the farmer finally felt ready to take the next step toward his dream. It wasn't an ordinary day on the farm. There was a sense of excitement mixed with nervous anticipation in the air. He had made a decision, a bold, almost unbelievable decision, and he knew that this moment would be remembered for the rest of his life. He was going to visit a luxury jet dealership, a place he had only seen in magazines and online videos, a place that represented wealth, power, and a world far beyond the fields he tilled every day. As he walked through the polished doors of the dealership, the first thing that struck him was the smell, clean, sharp, and expensive. The floor gleamed under bright lights, reflecting rows of sleek, shiny jets, each one a masterpiece of engineering and design. The farmer's eyes widened as he took in the scene. To anyone else, this place was intimidating, almost unreal. To him, it was a symbol of possibility, a glimpse of what he had been working toward quietly for so long. It wasn't long before a salesman approached him, impeccably dressed, with a smile that seemed polite but carried a hint of superiority. The salesman looked the farmer over, noting his simple clothes and the worn shoes on his feet. There was a flicker of amusement in his eyes, the kind that people use when they think someone is out of their league. "Can I help you?" the salesman asked, with just the slightest edge of disbelief in his voice. The farmer, standing tall despite his modest appearance, smiled politely. "Yes," he said, "I would like to buy a jet." For a moment, the words hung in the air like an impossible idea. The salesman blinked, unsure whether he had heard correctly. Then, laughter erupted, a short, sharp laugh that seemed to echo across the showroom. "A jet? Are you serious?" the salesman asked, still chuckling. "You're a farmer. Do you even know how much a jet costs?" The farmer remained calm. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't argue, and he didn't flinch. There was a quiet confidence in the way he spoke, a firmness in his gaze that made the salesman pause for a second, though he tried hard not to show it. "Yes, I know exactly how much it costs," the farmer replied, "and I am ready to buy one." The salesman laughed again, louder this time, thinking it was some kind of joke. He waved his hand toward the rows of jets, as if to say, "Pick any one you like, if you can." But deep down, he was starting to feel a twinge of curiosity. Who was this man, dressed like any other customer, who spoke with such certainty about something that was clearly out of his reach? The farmer began to walk among the jets, his hands brushing against the polished surfaces, admiring the craftsmanship, and imagining himself seated in the cockpit, soaring above the clouds. The salesman followed, still skeptical, making casual remarks about how unrealistic this was. "You do realize these jets cost millions, right? It's not like buying a tractor," he said. The farmer simply nodded, as if he had expected this reaction all along. What made this moment remarkable was not just the absurdity of the situation, but the stark contrast between appearances and reality. To the salesman, this man was an ordinary farmer, someone who shouldn't even be in this room. To the farmer, the salesman represented a challenge, a test of perception and belief. He had worked silently for years, building a life that allowed him to dream without limits. Now, he was ready to turn those dreams into reality, and he was about to do it in a way that no one would ever forget. As the conversation continued, the farmer's calm confidence began to unsettle the salesman. It was as if the ordinary man standing before him had some hidden power, some secret that defied all assumptions. And the salesman was about to learn, in a way he could never have anticipated, that sometimes the quietest, humblest people are the ones who hold the greatest surprises. The stage was set for a moment that would shock everyone present, a moment that would turn laughter into disbelief, skepticism into awe, and ordinary perception into a lesson about dreams, determination, and the hidden strength that can exist in the most unassuming people. The salesman watched the farmer closely, still trying to hide the laughter that bubbled up inside him. To him, this was absurd. He had seen countless customers in his career, billionaires, celebrities, business tycoons, but never someone like this. A simple farmer, dressed in worn clothes and dusty shoes, talking casually about buying a jet as if it were nothing more than buying a loaf of bread. The idea was laughable. And yet, the farmer's calm expression, steady gaze, and polite tone made it difficult for the salesman to dismiss him entirely. There was something unusual about this man, something the salesman couldn't quite place. The salesman decided to test the farmer, thinking he would expose him immediately. "All right," he said, trying to sound professional but with an unmistakable hint of mockery, "let's talk numbers. Do you realize that even a small private jet costs millions of dollars? Millions. And that's just the beginning: insurance, maintenance, fuel, pilot salaries. Have you thought about any of this?" The farmer nodded slowly, as though he had already considered every detail. "Yes," he said simply, "I have thought about it. I'm prepared." The salesman almost laughed out loud, shaking his head. "Prepared? You're a farmer. You don't have a business empire or a company. How could you possibly be prepared to buy a jet? Are you joking with me?" The farmer didn't smile or argue. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small notebook. "I keep track of everything," he explained. "My savings, my investments, and all the resources I've gathered over the years. Every decision I've made has been carefully planned to get me to this point." The salesman leaned back, incredulous. He had never encountered a customer who spoke like this. Normally, people dreamed of jets, maybe even talked about owning one someday, but no one came in fully confident that they could afford one. Most would stumble over their words, make excuses, or walk away embarrassed. But this farmer, he seemed different. Calm. Certain. Almost untouchable in his quiet confidence. "Show me," the salesman said, trying to sound firm, as if he still held control of the situation. "Show me that you can actually afford it. Otherwise, this is just a funny story I can tell my colleagues." The farmer smiled faintly, a subtle, knowing smile. He reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out his phone. His fingers moved confidently over the screen, navigating through apps and accounts with a skill that belied his humble appearance. The salesman watched with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "All right, let's see this," he said, still trying to mask the growing sense of unease that he couldn't quite shake. At that moment, something remarkable began to happen. The air in the room changed. The laughter that had filled the dealership earlier disappeared. The salesman felt a strange tension, a shift in the energy between them. It was as if the universe itself had paused, waiting for the next moment. The farmer's phone was glowing softly in his hand, a small beacon of a secret that no one had imagined possible. "You'll see soon enough," the farmer said quietly. He didn't boast, he didn't taunt, but there was an undeniable weight in his words. The salesman, for the first time, felt a flicker of doubt. Could it be that this man, this ordinary-looking farmer, actually had the means to buy a private jet? It sounded impossible, but the calm confidence in the farmer's eyes was unnerving. And then the moment came, the moment that would change everything. The farmer opened his banking app, scrolling through accounts, investments, and assets with a casual familiarity that shocked the salesman. Numbers appeared on the screen, figures so large that the salesman's mouth went dry. His eyes widened, and he took a step back, involuntarily, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. All his assumptions, all his judgments, all the laughter that had poured out of him just moments ago, vanished in an instant. The salesman froze. He could not speak. He could not process what he was seeing. A simple farmer, someone who, by every standard the salesman had used to measure wealth and success, should have been ordinary, was displaying a fortune that surpassed his wildest expectations. The tables had turned. The laughter that once mocked now seemed hollow and meaningless. In that quiet, electric moment, the salesman realized a truth he had never truly understood: appearances can be deceiving. Confidence, intelligence, and patience can build power quietly, in ways that no one notices until the right moment. And this farmer, humble and unassuming, had mastered it. The room felt still, almost sacred, as the salesman continued to stare at the screen, the magnitude of the farmer's preparation, discipline, and vision slowly sinking in. He had laughed before, but now he understood that the world is full of surprises, and that sometimes, the most unlikely people hold the greatest secrets. The farmer, calm and composed, pocketed his phone. "Shall we talk about the jet now?" he asked, his voice steady, inviting, and completely unfazed by the reaction he had caused. The salesman, still frozen, could only nod. He had no words. He had no laughter left. The impossible had just become reality, and he was witnessing it firsthand. After the shock of the banking app, the salesman stood there, still struggling to grasp what he had just witnessed. Numbers on a screen, numbers so vast, so unimaginable, revealed that this humble farmer had quietly accumulated a fortune that could rival the wealthiest people he had ever met. But it wasn't just the money that stunned him, it was the realization that he had completely underestimated the farmer. What he saw now was not luck, not a sudden windfall, but the result of years of careful planning, discipline, and determination. The farmer noticed the salesman's stunned silence and smiled gently, as if to say, "It's okay. I expected this reaction." Then he began to explain, not boastfully, but with quiet clarity, the method behind what seemed impossible. He spoke about his life with a calm authority, describing the countless decisions he had made over the years, each small choice stacking upon the other. While everyone around him spent money as it came, he treated every penny as a tool, a building block for the future. Every crop he sold, every side venture he attempted, every small investment, none of it was wasted. It all contributed to a vision that only he had ever fully understood. He told the salesman about his approach to saving and investing, and how he had quietly studied business and finance in his spare time. Books, videos, and mentors had taught him the principles of growing wealth and managing resources wisely. While others laughed at the idea of a farmer dreaming of a jet, he had turned that dream into a goal, then a plan, and then, step by step, into reality. The process had been slow, painstaking, and often invisible to outsiders. But that was the beauty of it, he never needed approval, recognition, or validation. He simply worked, quietly and consistently, toward his goal. What fascinated the salesman most was the farmer's mindset. He wasn't arrogant or boastful. He didn't flaunt his achievements or gloat over the disbelief of others. Instead, he had developed a patience and focus that was almost uncanny. Every setback on the farm had been a lesson. Every mistake in business had been a chance to learn. And every doubter, every person who laughed at his dreams, had only reinforced his determination to succeed. He had learned to ignore mockery and remain steadfast in the pursuit of his vision. Then the farmer revealed another secret, one that explained how he could afford the jet so confidently. He had diversified his investments over the years, small-scale trade, farmland, stocks, and even partnerships in local businesses. While the scale of each investment might have seemed ordinary on its own, the cumulative effect was extraordinary. Compound growth, smart choices, and consistent effort had transformed modest beginnings into a fortune that now sat on his banking app. It was a lesson in patience, strategy, and foresight, a lesson the salesman would never forget. The salesman, who had thought he had seen everything in his career, now realized that this simple man embodied principles many people only read about in books. Vision. Discipline. Quiet persistence. The kind of focus that doesn't seek applause, but quietly moves toward extraordinary goals. And all of this had been hidden beneath the farmer's unassuming exterior. The contrast between what the salesman expected and what he saw was almost surreal. He had assumed that wealth and success required flashy appearances and bold statements. But here was proof that it could also come from humility, wisdom, and unwavering determination. Finally, the farmer looked at the salesman, eyes calm and kind, and said, "I know it might be hard for you to believe, but this isn't luck. It's planning, patience, and knowing what you want. Anyone can do this if they are willing to focus, learn, and never give up. The words hung in the air, powerful and simple, as if challenging not just the salesman, but anyone who doubted the impossible. At that moment, the salesman realized something profound. He had laughed at the wrong person. He had assumed that a humble appearance meant a humble life. He had assumed that ordinary work meant ordinary results. But the farmer had taught him, in a single, quiet lesson, that vision and action are more powerful than appearances, and that real success often comes quietly, unseen until the moment it reveals itself. And in that dealership, surrounded by gleaming jets, the salesman began to understand that the story of the farmer was more than just about wealth or purchasing a luxury item. It was about the power of dreams, the importance of patience, and the incredible strength of someone who quietly believes in what seems impossible. The farmer had turned disbelief into inspiration, mockery into awe, and the salesman's laughter into a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The tension in the jet dealership was almost palpable. The salesman, still trying to process the farmer's explanation, could hardly tear his eyes away from the phone in the farmer's hand. Each swipe, each scroll, revealed more than just numbers. It revealed years of strategy, patience, and intelligence that the salesman had completely underestimated. The simple farmer, who had seemed ordinary in every way, was now showing proof of a fortune that rivaled some of the wealthiest people the salesman had ever dealt with. And yet, the farmer's calm demeanor never wavered. Then came the moment the salesman would never forget. The farmer, with the same quiet confidence that had defined his every step, turned the phone toward him, holding it just long enough for the screen to display the account balance. The salesman blinked. Then blinked again. The numbers stared back at him, impossibly large, utterly shocking. For a moment, he thought he was seeing things wrong. Could this really be true? Was it a mistake? But the figures were real, every digit confirming what the farmer had been saying all along. He had enough money not only to buy a jet but to purchase several if he wanted. The salesman froze. The laughter that had escaped him earlier in the dealership, mocking the farmer's dream, was gone. Completely gone. It had evaporated into stunned silence. He had spent years selling jets to billionaires, watching people negotiate, flaunt wealth, or even bluff. But nothing could have prepared him for this, a quiet, humble man from a small village, standing in front of him, casually proving that he had achieved the impossible. The farmer placed his phone back into his pocket, still calm, still collected, and looked around at the rows of jets. "So," he said simply, "let's talk about which one I'll take." His voice carried no arrogance, no showiness. It was matter of fact, yet powerful. It was a voice that demanded respect, not through words, but through the undeniable proof of action and preparation. The salesman, meanwhile, was struggling to form words. Every sentence that came to his mind seemed inadequate, irrelevant, or absurd. He wanted to laugh, to congratulate, to apologize, but none of it seemed enough. Instead, he simply nodded, unable to hide the awe in his eyes. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "I thought this was impossible." The farmer chuckled softly, a quiet sound filled with amusement and humility. "Nothing is impossible if you know what you want and work patiently to get there," he replied. "It may look impossible from the outside, but from the inside, every step is clear. Every decision builds toward the goal. That's all there is to it." For the salesman, it was a moment of revelation. He realized that he had been judging the farmer based on appearances, assuming that humble clothes and a quiet demeanor meant humble means. But the truth was far more extraordinary. This farmer had turned everyday life into a careful strategy, quietly creating wealth, and now stood ready to claim what most would consider a fantasy. Slowly, the salesman began to guide the conversation toward specifics, the jets, the models, the features. Every option was suddenly real, suddenly attainable. He explained the technicalities, the processes, the logistics, but the farmer listened patiently, already prepared for every detail. He asked intelligent questions, showing knowledge that surprised even the most seasoned salesman. Every answer, every decision, reinforced the reality: this was a man who had not just dreamed, but prepared, planned, and achieved. Finally, the deal began to take shape. The salesman, still processing the shock and awe of the moment, realized he had witnessed something truly rare: the complete reversal of expectation. He had laughed at the farmer, dismissed his ambitions, and assumed impossibility, but now he was facilitating the purchase of a jet for someone he had underestimated entirely. And in that moment, the lesson was undeniable. Dreams are not defined by who you are or where you come from. Patience, intelligence, and relentless preparation can turn even the wildest ambitions into reality. The farmer had done exactly that, leaving the salesman frozen, amazed, and profoundly humbled. As the papers were prepared and the selections finalized, there was a quiet sense of triumph in the room, not just for the purchase of a jet, but for the truth it represented: that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things, that hard work combined with vision can defy expectations, and that sometimes, the most unbelievable stories are the truest ones. And with that, the farmer was ready to take the next step, to soar above the clouds in a jet he had once only dreamed of, while the salesman remained behind, forever changed by what he had witnessed. The moment the farmer finalized the deal, the salesman stood rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak. He had seen many clients in his life, people who were wealthy beyond imagination, people who carried themselves with the confidence of entitlement, but he had never encountered anyone like this. The farmer was ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in accomplishment. The realization hit the salesman like a wave: he had been completely wrong to judge this man based on looks, status, or background. Every assumption he had made crumbled in an instant. The laughter he had once allowed to escape, mocking the farmer's dream, now seemed foolish and misplaced. He could hardly believe that the person he had dismissed so casually had quietly built the means to achieve the impossible. His mind raced as he tried to process how someone so humble, working from a small village farm, could outmatch countless wealthy clients he had served over the years. The disparity between expectation and reality was staggering. As he watched the farmer move confidently through the showroom, inspecting the jets as if he belonged there, the salesman felt a strange mix of emotions: astonishment, respect, and even a touch of humility. He realized that this encounter was more than a business transaction, it was a life lesson. He had assumed that power, wealth, and vision always came in flashy packages, wrapped in expensive clothes and loud voices. But here was proof that greatness could grow quietly, patiently, away from the eyes of the world, until the moment of revelation arrived. The salesman tried to speak, but words failed him. Every phrase he could think of sounded trite, inadequate to convey the magnitude of what he had witnessed. Finally, he managed to stammer out, I've never seen anyone do what you've done." His voice trembled slightly, betraying both awe and disbelief. The farmer turned to him, smiling gently. "It's not about luck," he said softly. "It's about focus, patience, and knowing what you want. Every choice I made, every step I took, led to this moment. It looks sudden, but it's the result of years of planning and action. Anyone who commits to their dream can do the same." The salesman nodded slowly, realizing that he had just been given a rare glimpse into the mind of someone truly extraordinary. He had judged, he had laughed, he had dismissed, and yet here stood undeniable proof that discipline and vision could defy every stereotype and expectation. He felt humbled, almost embarrassed, but also inspired. He realized that his own perspective on success had been narrow, limited by appearances and social norms. As the farmer prepared to leave, the salesman couldn't help but watch with a mix of admiration and wonder. He understood, perhaps more clearly than ever, that true power often hides in plain sight. The quiet ones, the patient ones, the people who think long-term and act strategically, they were the ones capable of the unimaginable. Even as the farmer walked out of the dealership, heading toward a life of dreams realized, the salesman stayed behind, changed. His laughter was gone, replaced by a newfound respect and a sense of awe. The encounter had taught him something that no sales pitch, no contract, no business deal could ever teach: never underestimate someone based on what you see on the surface. True greatness is built quietly, invisibly, and often reveals itself when least expected. For the salesman, the lesson was clear. The world was full of ordinary faces with extraordinary stories. And from this day forward, he promised himself that he would look beyond appearances, listen more carefully, and never again assume that someone's dreams were limited by where they came from or what they wore. The farmer had not only purchased a jet, he had left behind a legacy of inspiration. He had shown that humility, intelligence, and determination could achieve what most people thought impossible. And for the salesman, that truth would linger, reshaping the way he saw people, success, and the quiet power of a mind committed to its dreams. After the farmer had left the dealership, the salesman remained standing there, staring at the polished floors, the rows of gleaming jets, and the empty space where the man who had appended all his assumptions had just stood. The reality of what had occurred slowly began to sink in. This was more than a story about money, business, or luxury. It was a lesson about life, ambition, and the power of unwavering belief. The salesman realized that he had been living in a world measured by appearances, wealth, and status, and yet all of those markers could be misleading. The farmer had quietly demonstrated that true greatness often lies hidden, quietly nurtured by discipline, patience, and relentless focus. He thought back to the first moment the farmer had entered the dealership, the calm way he had walked in, the gentle determination in his eyes, and the conviction with which he had spoken. At the time, the salesman had laughed, thinking the dream impossible. But the farmer's journey revealed that nothing is truly impossible when a person combines vision with action. He realized that success was not always about showmanship, connections, or loud proclamations. Sometimes, it was about steady progress, careful planning, and a refusal to be discouraged by skepticism or ridicule. The lesson was clear: anyone, no matter how humble their beginnings, could achieve extraordinary things if they approached life with intention. The farmer's story was a testament to the power of dreaming big, but it was also a story about strategy. Every choice he had made, every sacrifice, every extra hour worked, every investment carefully considered, had been a step toward his goal. It was not luck. It was not coincidence. It was the deliberate result of vision, effort, and patience. The salesman also reflected on his own life. How many times had he judged clients or people he met by their appearances, only to discover later that he had underestimated them? How often had he dismissed someone's ambition simply because it seemed too audacious? The encounter had shattered those assumptions. He understood that true potential cannot be measured by clothing, background, or social status. It is measured by determination, creativity, and perseverance. Even beyond the dealership, the lesson resonated. The farmer's story was not just about wealth or success, it was about courage. The courage to dream without fear, the courage to act when others laughed, and the courage to persist when the odds seemed impossible. The salesman realized that anyone could learn from this: to remain committed to one's vision, to work quietly but consistently, and to never let doubt, whether from others or from oneself, become a barrier. In a way, the farmer had given him more than a shocking moment, he had given him inspiration. He had shown that life rewards those who plan carefully, dream boldly, and refuse to be limited by society's expectations. The salesman knew he would never forget this lesson, and that it would influence every decision he made, every interaction he had, and every person he encountered in the future. As the sun set outside the dealership, casting long shadows across the showroom floor, the salesman stood silently, reflecting on the magnitude of what had just happened. The farmer, humble yet extraordinary, had not only purchased a jet, he had purchased a place in the salesman's memory as someone who turned impossibility into reality. The salesman understood that the greatest victories are often invisible to the world until the right moment, and that extraordinary people sometimes appear in the most ordinary forms. In the quiet aftermath, the salesman made a silent promise to himself: to judge less, to look deeper, and to recognize that brilliance and determination often live where one least expects it. The farmer had walked away with a jet, but he had also left a legacy: a story that would inspire anyone who heard it, a reminder that dreams, patience, and unwavering belief can overcome even the tallest obstacles. And in that moment, the salesman realized something profound. The world is full of quiet achievers, people who work tirelessly in the background, who plan, who persevere, and who, when the time comes, reveal a greatness that astonishes everyone around them. The farmer was one of them, and his story would echo far beyond the walls of the dealership, a timeless reminder that determination and vision are more powerful than anyone could imagine. As the farmer walked out of the dealership, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city. The sleek jet he had just purchased waited on the tarmac, gleaming like a symbol of dreams realized. But more than the plane itself, it was the journey, the years of hard work, quiet planning, and unwavering belief, that truly mattered. Every step he had taken, every sacrifice, every long day on the farm, had led to this extraordinary moment. And now, as he took a deep breath and looked up at the sky, he felt a sense of fulfillment that went far beyond money or luxury. This was the reward for vision, perseverance, and the courage to believe in what others called impossible. Behind him, the salesman remained in the dealership, still processing the unbelievable turn of events. He had started the day thinking this encounter would be amusing, a simple story to share with colleagues about a farmer dreaming too big. But he now understood the depth of what he had witnessed. The farmer had not only defied expectations, he had shattered them completely. The salesman's laughter, disbelief, and skepticism had been replaced by respect, admiration, and a humbling sense of wonder. He realized that success and greatness could come quietly, in the most unexpected forms, and that true vision often lies hidden until the right moment reveals it. The farmer's story, though deeply personal, was universal. It was a reminder to anyone who had ever been doubted or laughed at for dreaming too big. It was proof that ordinary people, with ordinary lives, could achieve extraordinary things through careful planning, determination, and unwavering focus. The journey was never easy, and the world might mock you or tell you it's impossible, but the reward for persistence, patience, and belief in oneself is beyond measure. As he stepped onto the tarmac, the farmer felt the weight of years lift off his shoulders. He had proven, not to the world but to himself, that dreams are achievable when combined with action. The pilot waiting for him extended a handshake, unaware of the story behind this extraordinary man. The farmer smiled, boarding the jet with a quiet confidence, ready to soar above the clouds and explore a world that had once seemed out of reach. Back at the dealership, the salesman finally allowed himself to speak, sharing the story with colleagues and friends. It became a story of inspiration, a lesson in humility, vision, and patience. He would tell it over and over, not just because of the shock of the moment, but because it contained a timeless truth. Appearances can deceive, but determination, strategy, and unwavering focus always reveal their power in the end. The farmer's journey, from humble fields to the cockpit of a private jet, became a symbol of hope for dreamers everywhere. It showed that success does not always announce itself loudly or proudly. Sometimes, it grows quietly, nurtured by patience, hard work, and an unshakable belief in what is possible. And when the moment finally comes, it astonishes everyone, including those who doubted you most. As the jet lifted into the sky, leaving the village, the dealership, and everyone's assumptions behind, the farmer looked out at the horizon, feeling limitless. His journey was a testament to the idea that dreams are never too big, that determination can defy expectation, and that ordinary people, with courage and vision, can achieve the extraordinary. The story of the farmer and the salesman would be remembered, shared, and retold, not for the jet, not for the money, but for the lesson: never underestimate the quiet, humble dreamer, because sometimes they are capable of changing the world in ways no one could ever imagine. And with that, the farmer's dream had not only taken flight, it had become a beacon of inspiration for anyone willing to believe, work hard, and dare to dream beyond the limits others set for them.